Good. Okay, right. What is up here? And so I'm going to ask you for some things just so that we can make it a bit more interactive. But if you don't really know like the answer, you can just pass, or you can try to guess it or whatever. So it's not like a test, but it's just so that we go through the commands together to see the different things. Okay, so feel free like to pass or to guess it also. We can like try to invent how this is working. So I have I have a very empty, basically HTML. You see here, I have nothing but the body and an H1. And then I have nothing on the JavaScript and basically no styling for the moment. Okay, so let's see what we have seen on Monday. We have this page. Of course, normally we're not going to be creating everything through JavaScript. We may have some elements already here. We can also add elements here, but let's say that we want to add now a new element, a paragraph that goes under my H1. So how do I start? How do I create a new element? So first thing, create a paragraph. So let's say I want to create an element that's a paragraph. How would I do that? So I'm going to go with the order that I see you here, and then we go one by one command. So Monica, you are first on my screen.
Oh, yes.
Yes. How do I create an element like a paragraph?
For the paragraph, we need the P.
Mm-hmm.
And in the JavaScript, we need to create the ID in the paragraph.
So do you remember how is the command that we use for creating an element? So we start with document dot.
Yeah, the document. Get element by ID.
So the get element would get us the element if it is already created.
Okay.
But here I just want to create it. So there is no paragraph in my HTML. I want to create the paragraph.
Yeah, the let P or the variable. We need to.
So to store it somewhere. So let P equals
the document.
And then here
create attribute to
element. The attributes are the ones that are going inside the element. So like the href, the source, the ID, the class, so all these are the attributes. The element itself, it's element. So in order to create a new paragraph, we create the element P. And that will create us an element that will be of this format. Okay, so we have created the paragraph. So let's say I want to add some text inside this, because right now just this, so it's no text, it doesn't show anything. So how do I add? So add some text inside the paragraph. So Gabriela, how do I add some text? So I have my paragraph here. Yeah, so I don't need to query it. Yes.
I don't remember.
Inner, so I start with I. We have these two, inner HTML or inner text. We can use either, so inner text and set it to something. Okay, so this will actually make that the paragraph that I had before, now it is like that. Or I could also use inner HTML if I want to add some HTML tags as well, apart from simple text. For now, if we just want the text, then this would be fine with the inner text. So I added some text. Let's say I want also to add an ID to this tag. How do I modify some of the attributes, like an ID or a class? Well, let's say the ID, for example. So add an ID to the paragraph. Crystal, how would you go for adding an ID or modifying an ID?
I'm not sure, but maybe P and then style ID? No, is that right?
So the style will modify the style attribute. If we want to set the
Okay.
ID, we can directly like use ID. So
okay.
if it is one of the attributes that are already like existing, we could just say ID and then set it to something like my paragraph. And that
Okay.
would make that the P now has an ID inside my paragraph.
That's adding a new one, or yeah, if you want to add it.
Yes, if you
Okay.
even if you want to add it or if you want to modify it. So then if later I just want to change it, I can also say p.id and put something else inside, and then this will modify this, and we would have with the new ID here.
Is that similar to the activity yesterday, how we had image.source? Exactly the same thing. If there's a common attribute, then we can just do dot of something.
Yes, yes. So as in the images that we were accessing the source of the image, and we were saying p.source, and so with the ID we can do it like that also. So right now I have added all this, and even if I save it, I don't see it anywhere. Of course, well, here it will not appear, but I don't see it here as well. So I don't have it anywhere. So after creating the paragraph and adding some text and some ID, I also need to attach it to my document. Okay, so that it appears. So let's say I want to attach it. Here I have this body and I have an H1. And so let's say I want to attach it to the body. If I attach it to the body, it will go at the bottom of the body. So how can I append this P element to the body? So append P to body. So Jacqueline, any ideas?
It'd be, I don't know, body dot append child. And then,
child.
yeah, with the P in, would it be in quotations or?
So
just...
if it is in quotation, it's like if I'm creating a new P, what I'm going to pass here, it's actually the variable P that it has been storing the P that I'm creating. So it's not in quotation because it's referring to that variable. So I can do that, but I think, let me see. You will see if you check here on the inspector, body is not defined because I need to first like grab the body. Let me see if body work. Yes, so in specific for body, because it is a very basic main element of the HTML, we can also do document.body append child, and then this would work. But I cannot do body directly because it will be searching for some variable that is called body. I need to say that it's the body that is inside the document. If let's say I didn't want to attach it to the body but to some other element, the best way will be to first grab the element where I want to attach it. So before appending it to the body, so let's say here, choose, well, grab, select the body. So document dot get element, query selector, query selector, body. And then I could use directly body here. So first, like I select in which element I want to attach this child, and then with the append child, I attach it there. And okay, so let's create some more.
Sorry,
Yes.
Anna, what
Yes.
will happen if we use append without child?
Append, I think append is working also in this case, but let me check the difference between the two. Append versus append child. Add multiple node objects at once, unlike append child.
Okay.
So append, yes, and probably there is some example also here. So yes, here in the append, it adds various things. And the append child is only adding one. Okay. So yes, that's a good question. That's the difference. So in these cases where appending one, just append will also work. Or just append child, I mean, will also work. Okay, let's add some more paragraphs because I want to check one thing that we have not seen, or well, first we go with the things that we have seen. Okay, let's add the button. So that we can see also a bit the events. So let's say I want to add the button also in the body after the paragraph. How do I add the button? So where do I start? It will be some similar process with the paragraph. So how will that start? Rebecca, an idea?
Maybe you create a function like function add button events.
So the function, okay, we will need the function some point. That will be our handler. That will be what will happen when I click the button. I think you're referring to that function. Okay, so it will be at the handler function at some point, and then we will need to something like a click function, and then we will see what this will do. But before I add the handler function, I need to create the button element itself, because right now on my page, there is no button to attach the function to it. So the same as I did with the paragraph, that I create an element paragraph, I need to do with the button. So I need to create an element button. Create element button. I need to add some text in between the button, because right now my button it's with no text. So it just created this element like this, but it doesn't say anything in the middle. So if I now try to attach this, so let's say I try to append it as well. So body.append button. You see it here, very small, it's no text inside. So it doesn't show anything. I need to add some text in the middle so that it shows more like a button. Same as I did to my paragraph, that I added the inner text. I also add the bottom some text. Inner text. Let's say click me. Okay, so now the button has some text, and if I append it again to the body, it will right now here below the paragraph. So if we check the body here, we have the HUN that we had created before, like static, and then we have here the paragraph that we had appended, and here the button that we had appended. And so now let's say I want to add a function to this button. So which is called, well, I want to add an event listener. Add an event listener to my button. So let's say that the event that will respond to will be a click event. How would I do that? Mele, any ideas?
Button dot add event listener. This between brackets and then click comma also click but without the parentheses.
Okay, yes, because this is how I called my function. If I want to like call it a bit different so that I understand the difference, here I'm actually referring to the function that will be called when I'm clicking the button. So now every time I added this event listener, and that means that now my button is active, and if I click it, this function is called, but of course right now the function does anything, but if I want to see it in action, I could just add some console log, hi there, and then every time I click it, it appears here, hi there, on the console.
I have a question with
Yes.
the position of do you always need to have add event listener above this, that, create that, call that before you create the function, or because in terms of when you declare a certain variable that goes into a function, is there a specific sequence that you need to follow?
So normally it would be good, for example, you say if I refer to something, it should be created before that, because then it needs to find it, and so it needs to be created before. But what happens with JavaScript is that when a function is declared, even if it is below anything, the function declaration internally on the memory of JavaScript moves on the top, so everyone can see it, even if the function is written after. So in this case, the order is not important. So even if here I'm referring to a function which is still not created and I create the function later, it's not going to create an issue. If I wanted to refer, the same happens also with variables. So if I declare a variable later, so I have some variable here, let's my variable 3, I don't know, 2, a number or something. So if I declare the variable here, but I try to console log it here before I had declared it, it will give me an error because it says it cannot access my variable before initialization. So with variables, it is better that we first declare them and then we use them. But with functions, we can do it even if we declare them later, because the function declaration like moves on top of the program in JavaScript.
Okay, thank you.
So more, if you come up with more questions like as we do this, just shoot. Okay, so let's see how we can select more elements. We have used this query selector to get body, and I have let me go here to the index. So I have a header one with an ID. So when we have an ID, we can also use the ID in order to select header one. So let's say I want to select header one in order to modify it. Select by ID. Header one. Document, get element by ID. And then I just pass the ID of the element I want to select. Okay, so I have selected my header, and now if I want to modify it, I can modify, for example, its inner text again to say something else. by. And so we see it here that it changed. So I can select it by ID. And I can select it as I did here with the query selector by using the tag itself, so body. But this happens because ID is unique. And so when I select an element by ID, it's okay. I know that it will only get me one element. But if I select an element by a tag name, so body was also unique, there was no problem. But let's say I have more paragraphs. So let me add some more paragraphs in here. I'm static instead of creating them like that. So now I have 3 paragraphs, the 2 that are created like this statically, and the one that I have created through my JavaScript. So this one, my paragraph. So now if I want to select a paragraph, let's say I want to select it by tag name. So if I try to do the query selector P will return me the first paragraph that it will find, because now there are many paragraphs. So if I use query selector with the tag name, and let me also log it so that we see what we got. We got this paragraph, which is the one that says, I will find the text somewhere in the inner HTML, another paragraph. So it's the first one. With the query selector, it selects the first one. There is another way of selecting elements. If I want to select them all, that is query selector all. And then this will return me all paragraphs, everything that can be matching this thing that I'm passing here. And you see now what this returned is actually what is called a node list, which is like an array of nodes. And this now includes all 3 paragraphs, the first, the second, and the third that I have created. Okay, if I console log it, I see that it includes all paragraphs. So now if I want to modify, let's say, the text of this one, the one that says, and yet another one. So I could not just write paragraph dot inner text, because now paragraph is an array. It's not just one element. So I cannot say paragraph dot inner text, because, well, it's not doing anything because it doesn't understand which paragraph I'm trying to modify, since this is an array. And since this is an array, I need to use it as an array. So I need to say which children I need to modify. So for example, paragraph 1, which is 0, 1, 2. Okay, it's the second element. And so now I have modified this one. So when we are using IDs, we know for sure that it's going to be one thing that we get, because IDs is supposed to be unique in HTML. There cannot be more than one element that has the same ID. But when we use classes or when we use tag names, so here, for example, I have selected all paragraphs like this, then this will return us an array, and then we need to treat it as an array. Sometimes this is good because I just want to change, let's say I want to change the color of all paragraphs. And so instead of just grabbing them one by one, I can use some query selector like this that gets all paragraphs, and then I can group them as I would do with an array. So let I equals to 0, paragraph, which should be in actually paragraphs, because now it's a plural. Let's put the paragraphs. Dot length, so this is an array. And so for each one of them, so I want paragraph paragraphs I, same as I would do for them, for an array. So now inner text, new text. And now you see that I have modified them all at once. Okay, with the for loop, we treat this as if it is an array, even though it says node list, it's an array of type node list. And sometimes we want to do this, maybe we want to use some function. So let's say I have this handler function that I have created. And so I want that when I click, so now I have my text as it was initially, and I want that when I click this, it changes the text of all the paragraphs, of all the elements for something. So I could use that. I could have this query selector all, and there are more ways to select more than one elements. So another way would be get by tag name. So paragraphs. So you see here we have different methods. We have used get element by ID, but there are others. Get elements by class name. Watch here that there is a plural elements now. Elements by class name, elements by name, elements by tag name, and elements by tag name NS, which I don't really know what it is because I have never used. But let's say elements by tag name. Tag name is the HTML tag. So again, tag name would be the P. And this again would return us all paragraphs. Okay, since this is plural, this will give you a hint that this returns more than one element. And you see now this, the get elements by tag name, what it returns is called an HTML collection. It's a bit different than before, which was a node list, but at the end it's the same because it's still an array and we can treat it as an array. So these different methods return us an array type HTML collection. It's not exactly an array, so we cannot do all array methods to this. So maybe we could not use the sum or the find or some of these higher order functions that we have seen because it's not exactly an array, but at least we can loop through it as if it was an array with a for loop so that we do things more like in a group way. And so again, this, if I clicked, it would modify all elements. And so even if I have one element, so let's say I say get elements by tag name. So select the header again. And H1 document get elements by tag name H1. So even if H1 is only one element, I will console log. I only have one H1, but it still returns an array with just one element. So this method will always return an array. So even if it's just one element, you still need to treat this as an array when you use these methods. Okay, with IDs, it's a bit more simpler because you just know that there is one unique ID and you can use the get element by ID and you know that you will get just one element. Or if you use the query selector, not query selector all, but query selector, you will just get the first one. So you still want to get one element. And it's a bit simpler. But if you use these other methods, they return arrays and you need to remember that you need to treat those as arrays.
Anna?
Yes.
I was thinking about in line 29 and 30. So we grasped all the paragraphs, and I see that if you look at the console, it's a bit. It takes time to see which is the yes. It takes time then to see which is the text of every paragraph. I was thinking like maybe we can have 100 paragraphs and we only want to, I don't know, to modify 2 or 3 of them. to see more rapidly, to see faster, which is the content, can I write at line 3 like console log paragraphs value? Does it work?
So yes, you can. See, this is not an object, so you cannot just do like write console log paragraphs in a text because it will not understand. This is an array, so it should be something with brackets. I think this is like the easiest way if the paragraphs have an ID, because then you see the ID. Or if you go over them, then also you can see here which one is highlighted. But there is no quick way of just seeing which it is. No, just if they have an ID, not the text. If not, with the for loop. So you can do the console log, but inside the for loop, and then you do this thing, and you console log the paragraphs I inner text. And so it will console log the different texts. But I don't know if it will be very helpful, because also imagine a paragraph, it's a paragraph, so it will be a block of text. So if you have many paragraphs with a lot of text and you console log it, then it's also going to be a bit messy to check. I think maybe IDs are the best way for this. Okay, so we selected some elements and we can set some attributes. Let's try to set something different apart from the inner text. So here with this button, I'm changing the inner text, but let's say I want to do some stuff. So I want with this button to change this text to new text and also make it red. Okay, so how would I do this? I have a couple of ways. One is by using classes and one is by changing the style attribute. Charlene, do you remember with the style attribute maybe? So let's say I want to change again for each element, the text color to red.
So we would do paragraphs index.style.color.
.style.color, and then the color. Okay, and so now if I click it, it changes the text and it also changes the color. Remember that here I can also use any CSS thing, like as I was saying, the background color that we can also change. But then remember that we need to use camel case if we use this here. So we'll put some other color. And it changes. Color can be referred with the name, or we can pass the, I don't remember how it is now. Yes, so we can pass the hexadecimal way of writing it, or the RGB 2550, I think it is again for yellow. Yes, and there is also another one that is called RGBA, that it has a fourth thing here that is the opacity. So how opaque this yellow can be. So with the yellow and this text, you don't see it very much, but it gets a bit more transparent. So there are different ways of dealing with color, but yes, this is more on styling. So don't to go that much into it, but if you like to check it, I have passed also some color reference in the resources. So with style, what we do, we modify the styles that are in line. Okay, remember now if we check the paragraph, and this happens when I click the button. So for each paragraph, it added this style attribute with a color red and a background color yellow. So these are like inline styles. If instead I want to add some class, first I need to have the class created. So I cannot create the class here and add it. I need to have the class created in the styles CSS. So let's say I want to create a class here, let's say B. And what we'll do, it will do the font size. Extra large. So I have this class here and I want to add it as well to my paragraphs. Or maybe not to all paragraphs. Let's say I just want to change the paragraph 0. Paragraphs 0. So when I'm dealing with classes, I have two things that I can do. It's either class list or class name. Class name assumes that there is only one class, and I'm adding this class name directly. Class list assumes that there are many classes, there can be many classes, and it just adds an additional class. So it's like a list of classes. So if I use class name, I can directly pass the reference to that class that I created, that is text. This big text, yes. And so now, if I click the button, okay, this did not happen. Let me check. Class name. Let me try with the class list, because sometimes class list add. No. Let me check. Is this one? Okay, but it's not adding the class. Yes.
What I found, like while watching tutorials yesterday, how they use the class list dot add is after add they put it in
Parentheses.
Yeah.
Yes. That's true. Good catch, Darlene. Let me say big text. And it's still, I need to check. Let me check them. It's easier if we check. Class list add. You can add and remove paragraphs. 0 doesn't understand. I'm not sure now because we have it in some example working, but I will check. So no, here it's not working. But I will check it, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. Sometimes something silly. Should be class list add and the text in here, yes. Let's try to add it to something else outside of the button and of the form. Let's try to have it say one. Let me try here. Here one. Yes, now it added the class, but yeah, the text is not much bigger because it's, but at least we have the class here. I think my class is not loading. Because on here you see on the, if I check this element and I see which classes apply to it on the CSS, this class doesn't show. So, so there's something wrong with the class.
I was able to add, sorry, I was able to add a class by using class name also. Kind of like in the chat.
I'm not loading. Yeah, sorry, I'm not loading the the style sheet. I'm not loading the style sheet. How is it? It's good. Okay. Also because I was not loading the style sheet here. Okay, now it's working because now at least the class is added, and yes, it shows here also. So this is working. It's just that it's not much the change with extra large because this is already a header. So try to. Okay. Okay, now it's working. I was not loading the style CSS. So now when I click it, it adds the class. Well, the toggle is add if it's not there, or remove it is if it is there. So the toggle is like an on-off thing, but you can use add to add the class or remove to remove a class. So we can also play with classes like this. So now I'm just adding the class with the toggle. Every time I would hit the button, basically it should remove or add the class, because it checks if the class is there, it removes it, and if the class is not there, it adds it. So you see this text, how it's getting bigger and smaller if I use the toggle. So the thing is that, so for styling, we can use two things: the style to change things directly, but this normally works for small things. So if we want to change just one or two things, we can do this like that with inline styling. If not, we need to use some bigger classes which have some more complete styling, and we have to have the classes defined before. So here in my style CSS, and of course load the file correctly in the index. So remember, in the index we link the files, the styles is linked here on the head, and the script, the JavaScript, is linked here on the body, so that all these files are linked together. Okay. Let's see what else we could try. The events. We have tried, so okay, let's try a form. Okay, this is the one that we did with the class name. Yes, with class name, you can do it like this because it assumes that there is only one class. Okay, questions on this? Or what, something that is not clear? I'm going to try to add a form as well. Or let's say even better. Let's leave this example for now. And let's go back to this student's example that has the form already there. So right now in what I showed you, just had all the elements that were basically created dynamically. So we created everything from the JavaScript, but this is not normally the case. And also in your activity, you have some structure created already in the HTML with maybe some forms, some inputs, some button, h2s, divs, all the elements can be already created. And then you use your index just to modify them. So here I was using the get element by ID mostly because I had an ID for all elements, but we can also use some of the other methods like the query selector or get element by class name or get element by tag name, etc. So let's see. Remember this example? I'm going to open this again with the students. So we have a simple form. Let me see. And we add some names, so I'm going to add your names. I added also some background and everything so that we see the grid. So this is a 4 grid. So every time I click the add, it creates a new element and it adds it in a grid form. So how is this done? So the structure on the HTML, I have an H1 with just the title, the students list. I'm going to put one next to the other so that we can see it a bit better. And then there is the form. This is my simple form that has, in fact, here I'm not using form. I will change this now to form so that we also check a bit the peculiarity of how forms work. But this is not an actual form. These are just like some input and a button. So it's not part of a form element. It's just part of a div element. And I have a label, an input, and a button. So the label is just the text that is next to the input. This is good for also for accessibility. So it's good that every time we have an input that we have a label because of so that the machines can read them. If we have a reader for people with some problem like eye problem, and that it reads this, so that it's good that we try to have a label for our inputs. And then we have the input of type text. I have used some ID on the input so that I can grab it easily, and then a button to add the names. And then the other section, that is this one, the student section, at the beginning is empty. It has a title and it has a grid. Here it's the grid with an ID students grid. So this is a grid because if we check the styles, I have used the symbol grid. Here, I have used a simple CSS grid that displays 4 columns with some gap in between the columns. So display grid in order to use grid. Then we say how many columns we want and the size of them, and then maybe some gap or some padding, so some simple styling. In this case, I have 4 columns. Then for each item of the grid, so this student, it's one of these boxes. I have some background color, some text color, some aligning, maybe font size, etc., so that it looks like this. But this is just styling of the grid. So at the beginning, this grid is empty. Is the example I showed you on Monday, and it has just something that says no, you have no students yet, but then this disappears when I start adding students. And so whenever I add the name, this button, this add button, is linked to an event listener. When I click the button, it calls this event listener the handle click that gets the value from the input. So from this input here, it gets the value. Okay, I have already selected the input up here in line 6, get element by ID, and I have selected, no, sorry, this in line 3, student input. I have selected the input and I get its value, that is what the user will enter. And then I check if the value is empty or not, then I will add the new student. And in this case, I'm calling another function, but you could also like do all this in here if you want. So you don't really need 2 functions, but this is just for making it more structural. So the handle click will call the add new student function. And the add new student, it creates an element that it's a span. So each one of these boxes, it's a span element. And it adds the class with the class list that we have seen, class list add, it adds the class student so that it has these blue letters and background and spacing, etc. And as inner HTML, so as the text that it will appear, it uses the name, so the input that I have got from the user. And of course, apart from creating the element, I also need to append it. So I append it to my div that is the grid. The student list is the grid itself. And I also save it to an array. Okay, so this is what we have done on Monday. This is quite similar to what, what you had to do with your first part of the activity. So in the first part, in here, you were, instead of a name, you were having a URL. And instead of having a name appearing here, you were creating images instead of span. So let me also show you the form and then we review a bit your activities. So if I want to add more things, not just one input, so maybe I want to have two inputs, like one for the name and another one, then the input for all is last name. Last name. So I have now a name and a last name, and I have two things to cut. So maybe if I have more than one thing, it's a good idea to, instead of have all this small form inside a div, to actually put it inside a form. Okay, so now it's included inside the form tag. And how is this useful? So forms can grab all elements that are inside them and submit it somewhere. So that's why they are used, because we normally have some action. So in the form, we will see later when we work with the backend, but we say some action like post. That means that all these items, all these values will be posted somewhere to a server, to a backend server, so that it processes them or stores them, etc. So we will normally have some action. We don't have to put this now because we don't work with anything on the backend. But then that means that if now I'm on a form, if I try to add a name and a surname, and I do add, it refreshes automatically. Okay, this is what was happening to many of you. Because the form has this as inherit, it sends things to the server and then it refreshes. If I want to stop this behavior, because I want to process this thing and I want to send them to a server, whenever I use a form, I need to add to my handler something that is called event prevent default. And of course, I need to pass the event here, which comes automatically on every handler. So that means that it will prevent the default behavior of the event. The default behavior of the event is to submit everything to a server, and I don't want to do that. This will stop from submitting to a server, so that I can process the data myself and to do something else with that. Okay, and so another thing that we can do with the forms, instead of like having every input of the form one by one selected. So right now I'm selecting like the first input, the name, and then if I wanted to also keep the last name, I need to have another get element by ID last name. And then if I have an email, get element by ID email, and I will choose one by one the inputs. Instead of doing it like that, I have a form. I could actually use what is called the form elements, because the form groups all the elements and stores them like all together and then process them all together. So for doing that, let's modify this a bit. Let me select the form first of all. It's where selector. And instead of adding the listener to the button like this, I'm going to add the listener to the form. Because the form can also have a listener. And it listens for a submit happening. And so I'm going to call the handle click when the form is submitted. And okay, for this, I would also need this button to be of type submit, so that it understands that it needs to submit. When I click this button, it means that it will trigger the submission of all the form elements. So let's just console log what will happen. So now I have a form, I have two inputs and a submit button inside. And I'm adding the event listener not to the button itself, but to the form. So I added a submit event listener to the form. And let's just console log what this will bring. So no, not in here, in the link. I will just put all this in comment. So whenever I click, I just want to see what is happening. So I will console log this. Let me just put the. So my styling is not the best, but it's okay. Now we are just checking. So now it didn't refresh. First of all, it didn't refresh. And so this submit event, it has a lot of things inside. And so the target is the form, because the event listener was on the form. And there is one thing on the form that is called elements, target elements. So let me find this so that you will see this. Elements here. This will be useful. We will use this a lot because now the form has everything, all inputs, the first and the last name. So basically the two inputs that I had in this form, it have them all grouped in this elements array. So instead of just taking one by one, the different inputs, grabbing them like this one by one, I can just grab them all and I will also log them one by one here. So event, target, elements. These are the elements of the form. And so I say the first one, or I just console log so that you see them. So I can work with more than one items at the same time. I don't need to add to all of them. It's this one. So it's an array that has all the inputs, and I can get the value of the first, the value of the second, the value of the third. So I can get the value of each thing and store them instead of having to grab them one by one. So in this case, if I wanted, let's say, to have the name would be the first one. So it will be the event target elements 0 value. And the last name would be the second one. And let's just console log this. So always try to console log things before you try to manipulate them in the HTML so that you make sure that you get things right. Try to console log to see that exactly what is this thing that you are grabbing. And now, since we have two inputs, maybe seems that we can just directly do it as we were doing it, like get element by ID, each one of the inputs. But remember, a form can be big. We can have many inputs from the user on a form, like a contact form or any type of form that you can think. So instead of having to take each one of the elements, it's better that we just get the form. And if we don't want to have all these, of course, like this, we can simply assign this to like form items, all this, so that it makes it a bit easier to work. And then I just use form item 0, form item 1, etc. So for this second part of the activity, you had to have a form that was a bit bigger than just the name. So no, just the URL. You had the URL and you also had the title and you had some description. So you needed to have 3 inputs, right? So there was an input for the URL, for the title, and also there was a text area that you could add some description. Put placeholder. So you see now the styling is not good, but it's okay. I don't really mind that much of the styling. I can check this later. So again, now I don't need to do anything else because already my form will return everything. So simply by grabbing this third item, that let description, again, form items, this would be second one, and so I don't need to add more to query all the inputs one by one. So again, if I add the name, I can see them all here. Okay, questions? Have you done this second, the ones that tried the second part, have you done it with a form? Have you used these form elements? Or you just go to one by one the inputs?
Just one by one, but it didn't work. But
It didn't work. Did you have some concrete problem?
wasn't pushing anything anywhere in the it wasn't kind of taking the actual values. I think maybe it's something to do. I need to go over the syntax. Maybe that's the reason.
Well, we can check it. So another way of doing this, let me check. Name. Just check one thing. Yes. So because maybe this, like working like this with the array, it seems that, but do I have to keep track? Like if it is the first or the second or the third item, this is really hard to work with. Another way of working with form elements is just by referring to them with the name that we have used on them on the form. So in here, when you create some type, some input type, you can set a name for this input type. So this name is name, and here I will just put it first name. And so the label is okay, don't worry about the label. So this input has a name of name, this input has a name of last name, and in the text area, I can also add the name of description. And then this input, all these fields, they are named, so I can refer to them by using this name. Instead of using the position in the array, I can just say the form items last name and the fourth items dot description. And this will also work. So I get all the form items, and then I can access them by the names that they have. And this makes it a bit easier to work with forms. And so now I have defined rating value. Which one is it? 17. I changed this to first one. Yes, okay. And I can just get them again like this. This is easier than working with array. So with forms, you can use this method. Like, first of all, yes, you select the form. So you have a form tab, you select the form, and you add an event listener to the form, a submit event listener. So at the moment that the button is clicked, that means that the whole items of the form are submitted. And then first you prevent the default behavior. When you are inside this function, you prevent the default behavior that is that try to submit actually this data somewhere else to a server. And then you grab all the items from the form that will be stored in the event target elements. So in these elements, if it is a form, then it will store all the items of the form, and then you can access them one by one by referring to them, but the name that you have set to them. So now I could actually have this as I had it before, and it should still work. So it should create this button, and then, well, I'm not sure I will write this correctly. Let's say, and it can add one by one the items again, even though I'm not using these other things. I'm just using the name for now, just on the inner text, but it's adding those. Okay, and so let's try to save all these things that we are grabbing from the form. So right now I'm just adding them, and I use the name. So how can I store this information? So I want to create some kind of storage for these students. Right now, at the beginning, I had an array. So here I had like a students array, and I was just pushing the name when I just had one name. But what if I have more information? So now I have to store a name, a last name, and a description for each student, not just one name. So what would be like the best format of storing those?
Objects?
Yes, that's a good idea. So let's say we create a user or a student object, and then I have a name that I set to the name. So I will put first name. So that it has some properties. I store all these as properties. Last name, that is his last name. So this is this one. Okay, the first is how it's called inside the object, and the second is the value that I'm passing, that it's this variable that I got from the form. And description. So I'm creating this student object, and then I can push this student object to my array. Students array. So every time I create a new student, I add an object with all the information of this student to the array so that I can reuse later. Because right now I'm just showing the name, but I do want to keep the rest of the information for something else. And I can push it to my array, and then instead of console log this, I will console log students array so that we can see how it increases every time I'm adding a new student. Want to add some comments? Create a student object, store all info, and then we just push this to the students array where we're keeping everyone. To remove the push word here. So let me write, yes, so Anna. And here I have this object, the first thing created with name, last name, and description. And then if I try to add some other student, Gavi, I will put it as I see it. It's adding this here with name, but also now my array has two objects inside. One is for the first one, and second here. And every time I add a new student, it will be also added to my array. Okay. This is useful because maybe later I want to access all this information. So one thing is what I'm showing now. Now I'm just showing the name, but then maybe later I want to, in the part 3 of the exercise, you will want that when you click on one of these images, it shows also the rest of the information, like the title and the description. This is the step 3 of the activity, right? So the step 2 is to have this form with more information and simply create the same blocks of images. But on the step 3, we want to, when I click on one of them, that it shows the rest of the information. So I need to have this rest of the information stored somewhere. And this somewhere can be an object and an array of objects. Questions? I need to show you one more thing, but we can have a small break if you want, like a 5 minutes break, and then I can show you one more thing and we can work more on the activity.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
Under the object, the student object created a template. How come there's okay, sorry, I was gonna say why it's not name.value, but it's a variable and that's already assigned to the first name.
Here, you mean?
Yeah, because I
Yes.
just saw that it's already a value there.
Yes, so it's here, the value, we get it here. But you could, instead of doing it like this, you could just, so that it's the code is shorter, you can just put this in here. So you don't need to do it here as you want. So here I had already have them in some variables stored, so I use the same variables. So more?
Can I ask what the
Yes.
span element is? The
Which
span
one?
element? Yeah, the span
span.
element.
Mhm.
Because I thought it was like to stretch the grids, but I don't know if I confused that one.
So a span element, it's an inline element. It does it. So inline elements in HTML are the ones that they don't change line automatically. So a paragraph, it's a block element because every time you create a new paragraph, it will change line. While the span are inline elements because if I just put span next to the other, they will be on the same line. And so it's normally used for formatting. So here, let's say if I reload this, I have this reloaded. Let me add it outside of the grid because if not, it just takes. So if I have this span element, And then I add some other next to it. Or even if I add it below, it doesn't matter. The break here that you do, it doesn't matter. It's not interpreted as a break. Anytime you change line here, it's not really changing the line or the representation or the view. So if I have two span elements, I'm inside the grid. That's why it's showing in a different line, because it's not keeping them. Let me put it right here. Okay, so you see it's one next to the other. Some separation so that we see it. Controls. I will add some paragraph. So if we use paragraphs or other blocks, div is also a block that is changing line, but span they don't change. I'm not very creative with this, but so you see here the span are like one next to the other, while the paragraph, every time I add one, it's like a new block, it's changing line. So this is the basic difference of a span compared to a paragraph or a div, that it's a block of text, but it's an inline text. And it's normally used when we are inside some other text, like in a paragraph, and we want to just do some styling in maybe just one word of paragraph. So we will just then close this word in a span, so that maybe we do it italic or bold or some other style, or style, color, red. So if I want to do something in a smaller part of the text, that's why normally we use a span. It's just for modifying part of the text of a bigger block. Or to apply different styling, yes, in different parts of text. So you said you thought the span is for a grid, like for...
Yes.
So for the grid, you can use anything. You can use a div, you can use a paragraph, you can use, so I use span, but it's even better if you use a div, because it will create small blocks, basically. But since on the div I have the separation anyway, it's not important. You can use a span. But no, the main use for span is for this, for styling smaller parts of text.
And in that case, even if you have like a CSS external file, if you only want to change that little word, would you do it that way inside the HTML, or would you do it in the CSS document?
So I could do it both ways. I could have a class, and instead of passing it here, I could just add the class and have the class defined this text class that I had before in the styles, and I can pass the class in the span. Or I could do it inline. Normally, we try to avoid the inline styling. It's better that you have the style separate in the style CSS. But if it is for something small, it's okay if you just do it quickly here. So you can do it both ways.
Okay, thank you.
I
More
also have a
questions? Yes.
question. So when we do the storage and then we have it in an array, so if we refresh the page, is the information going to be on there?
It's lost. Yes, that's why we use a backend server, so that we want to keep persistence of the information, because if not, every time you reload the page, all this code reloads, and so it will start from here and will put the array to 0 again. So all this code that is outside the function, the code that is inside the function will run when the function will run. So when the button is clicked or an event will happen. But the code that is outside any function means that it will run at the moment that the page loads. So whatever I have here, it's running from when the page loads, and every time it reloads, it will go back to 0. That's why also I was saying to you, Crystal, for the console log, if you have it outside the function, it will just run once at the beginning, and then it will not load every time that you do something. So yes, that's a bit hard, because every time you want to do some test, then you reload, and then you need to start building your array again from 0. So maybe you had all your images, and then you want to change something, and then again need to put all the URLs and everything. But we will see also databases for storing things.
Anna, can I ask a question? I
Yes.
managed to get so the objects or the information to go into objects, and then the objects look like they're being added to the array, but every time I add a new object, so enter new information in the form, the array that is in the console log like copies the object. So for example, like cat, or I'm using cat, so like cat
Yes.
1 shows up and it's there by itself, like that's fine. But then when I add cat 2, the array has 2, so cat 2, cat 2. It doesn't have cat 1 and then cat 2. And so I'm not sure why it might be like duplicating the object and not keeping the first one. Like the picture stays on the site, but the information in the array shows whatever I just put in there multiple times. So even number 3, it shows like cat 3, cat 3, cat 3 instead of 1, 2, 3.
So it gets the last one.
Yeah.
Only. We can check the code if you want to share the screen.
Okay, yeah. And we don't have to do it now if we want to take a break or whatever, if it makes more sense to do it
Or
later too. It's whatever's fine.
yes, okay. Let's have a break for everyone, like 5 minutes, and we can check it after the break or when we were doing the activity.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.